Hi guys, and welcome to Last Light Radio channel. Tonight we step into a year that people love to polish until it shines. A year of brave speeches, fluttering flags, and men declaring that liberty belongs to all. But what if you stood in that bright scene and noticed the shadows first? What if the same words that thrilled a crowd in a tavern yard sounded very different when you heard them through a kitchen door, from a stable loft, or beside a tobacco field at dawn? You can almost smell damp earth and wood smoke drifting through the dark, while somewhere a bell rings and someone talks grandly about natural rights, as if the sentence itself has never met a chain. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are in the world and what your local time is right now. Now, dim the lights, and you enter British North America in 1776, where the air feels charged with argument. You do not enter a quiet land. You enter a place humming with suspicion, gossip, trade, sermons, and fear. Wagons creak through muddy streets. Horses snort in the cold morning. Harbour ropes groan against wooden posts. In city taverns, men lean close over mugs and speak about Parliament, taxation, boycotts, and rights. Printers ink pages that smell sharp and metallic. Church bells carry over rooftops. Newspapers pass from hand to hand. Everywhere, white colonists talk about liberty as if they have discovered it fresh that very week. And yet, as a black American in 1776, free or enslaved, you hear those same words with a different pulse in your chest. The colonies hold nearly 500,000 enslaved people by the time independence is declared. That is one of the plain, solid facts beneath all the grand language. In some regions, especially the Chesapeake and the lower South, slavery shapes the landscape as surely as rivers and roads do. Tobacco, rice, indigo, wheat, livestock, shipping, household labour, and skilled trades all lean on black labour. In northern towns, slavery is usually smaller in scale, but it is present there too, tucked into shops, kitchens, docks, rope walks, and wealthy homes. Liberty is being discussed loudly in a society that runs, in part, on bondage. The irony is not subtle. It practically stomps through the room in muddy boots. If you stand in Boston, Philadelphia, New York, Charleston, or Williamsburg, you would notice how different the rhythms of life feel. Yet one thing stays cruelly familiar. Black people are watched, counted, assigned, traded, hired out, punished, promised, threatened, sometimes praised for loyalty, often suspected of dangerous thoughts. Even the free are rarely allowed to forget how fragile their freedom can be. A paper can prove your status, but a paper can also be questioned, lost, ignored, or snatched away by a man with more confidence than conscience. You begin to notice the way sound itself carries power. White men raise toasts to freedom in candle-lit rooms. Outside, a cart rattles over stones while an enslaved driver pulls the reins. A child cries from an upstairs room. A woman called from her sleep before dawn feels the splintered handle of a bucket in her hands. A smith's hammer rings. A gull shrieks above the harbour. The world is full of noise, but some voices matter more than others. That is one of the first lessons of 1776. Still, black Americans are not passive figures standing at the edge of the stage. They think, judge, compare, and decide. They listen carefully. They measure risk with astonishing precision. They know which white men talk too much, which mistresses pray kindly and punish coldly, which roads lead toward water, and which rumours might keep a person alive. Sleepy history sometimes makes the revolution sound like a clean debate between patriots and loyalists. Real life is far messier. For black people, the crisis can sound less like a trumpet and more like a locked door rattling on its hinges. You move through a world where status can change with terrifying speed. A free black sailor in a northern port may find work unloading molasses, tar, and rum. only to be seized by a press gang or cheated of wages. An enslaved woman in Virginia may hear her owner rant against British tyranny while he asks where the missing silver spoon has gone, as though his household itself were a tiny empire under siege. An enslaved boy sent to carry a message may linger just long enough near a tavern window to hear a phrase about equality, not because anyone means it for him, but because ideas travel farther than their owners intend. As one of history's little jokes, the powerful speak carelessly, the powerless listen closely. In 1776, the smell of revolution is not romantic. It is sweat, horse dung, wet wool, tobacco smoked, spilled beer, printer's ink, river mud, and bread crust browning near the hearth. It is the roughness of homespun cloth against the skin. It is cold fingers in winter and flies in summer. It is the ache in your back from carrying, lifting, scrubbing, rowing, chopping, sewing, sweeping, or bending low in a field. Fine speeches float above these things, but daily life remains stubbornly physical. That is especially true for enslaved people, whose days are structured by other people's clocks, moods, and profits. Yet even in the most controlled spaces, the mind moves. You can imagine a stable hand in Virginia hearing a master praise the cause of liberty, and silently wondering whether liberty is one of those fancy imported goods meant only for the parlour. You can picture a black dock worker in New York watching crates shift from ship to shore, thinking how strange it is that tea can become a symbol of oppression while human beings are still sold. Gentle sarcasm may be one of the few luxuries available. You take it where you can. The language of the revolution spreads through newspapers, sermons, handbills, and conversation. Some black Americans can read. Many cannot, because literacy has been denied or obstructed. But ideas do not belong only to readers. They move by memory, repetition, and talk. A sentence heard once may be repeated a dozen times by nightfall. A proclamation may be read aloud in a public place. A minister's sermon may pass from one mouth to another, changing shape slightly each time, like a pebble turned in the hand. In that world, hearing becomes its own form of political education. And what do you hear? You hear phrases like liberty, natural rights, tyranny, virtue, corruption, slavery. That last word has a bitter double life. White patriots use it constantly to describe their relationship to Britain. They say they are being enslaved by unjust laws. They say chains await them if they do not resist. For black listeners, the metaphor is almost insulting in its carelessness. Chains are not a metaphor at all. They are iron, weight, abrasion, and noise. They leave marks. They clink in carts. They close around wrists. They're real enough to bruise the imagination. This contradiction is not hidden from black Americans. In fact, many understand it with razor clarity. Petitions by enslaved and free black people in the Revolutionary era show that some directly use the colonists' own language against them, asking how men who cry for liberty can deny it to others. The thought is simple. The thought is devastating. It does not need fancy decoration. Historians still argue over how widely revolutionary ideals truly transformed black expectations in the earliest months of the war. Some scholars emphasize the deep caution of people who had seen white promises evaporate before. Others suggest that the political turmoil opened new mental space, new ways of imagining action, movement, or appeal. Both views hold something true. Hope in such a world is rarely pure. It usually arrives mixed with suspicion, like a candle set in a drafty room. There are also differences that matter deeply from colony to colony. In South Carolina and Georgia, where enslaved people often form a large share of the population, white fear of revolt hangs in the air like summer thunder. Patrols, codes, and punishments reflect that anxiety. In New England, slavery exists in smaller numbers, and some enslaved people live in close proximity to white households in ports and towns, where news travels quickly and the lines between servant, labourer, and property are publicly visible every single day. The geography of slavery changes the geography of listening. A quirky little tidbit slips through the cracks here. In some urban households, enslaved men were dressed in conspicuous livery, bright or carefully tailored clothing meant to display the status of the owner rather than the comfort of the wearer. Imagine that strange theatre for a moment. A man denied control over his own body is made into a polished accessory, like a moving silver cup or an especially articulate chair. History can be elegant in the most irritating ways. And then there are the free black communities, small but significant, especially in port cities. They include sailors, labourers, artisans, washerwomen, domestic workers, musicians, preachers, and people who move between legal freedom and practical insecurity. Some marry, some rent rooms, some purchase goods on credit, some struggle constantly to remain unentangled from debt, kidnapping, or arbitrary arrest. Freedom exists, but it is narrow, conditional, and watched. You feel its edges everywhere. At night, those edges become easier to sense. The air cools. Hearth fires soften to a glow. Pine boards creak under careful steps. Somewhere a fiddle scrapes out a tune. Somewhere else, a baby stirs against a mother's shoulder. Men who spent the day shouting about independence lower their voices to murmurs. In these quieter hours, Black Americans can exchange news more freely, though never safely. Someone has heard that war is coming in earnest. Someone says the king may offer freedom. Someone says the patriots need soldiers. Someone says this is the moment to run. Someone says no, not yet. Because rumour can kill a person just as quickly as hunger can. You learn that information itself can be dangerous. To know something too early is risky. To know it too late is worse. There is no single black experience in 1776. That matters. Age matters. Gender matters. Place matters. Legal status matters. So does the temperament of the owner, the closeness of war, the presence of kin, the chance of travel, and the tiny accidents that shape a life. A child in a Philadelphia kitchen hears the revolution differently from a rice field labourer near Charleston. A free black mariner hears it differently from an enslaved seamstress in a Virginia household. But across these differences, one shared truth hums steadily beneath everything else. The rhetoric of freedom has escaped its cage, and once words are loose in the world, they become difficult to herd back. That does not mean justice appears overnight in a powdered wig carrying flowers. Let us be serious. Most white revolutionaries do not suddenly become champions of black freedom because they have discovered lofty principles. Many are perfectly content to admire liberty in the abstract while stepping over bondage on the way to dinner. But ideas have consequences even when their speakers are hypocrites. Sometimes, especially then, so you stand in 1776 and feel the tension building. A declaration will soon announce that all men are created equal. Those words will be famous. They will also be incomplete, compromised, and haunted from the first day they are spoken. Black Americans know this not from theory, but from touch, sound, smell, and the hard arithmetic of everyday life. They know it in the sting of cold water on winter hands, in the smoke caught in a low ceiling, in the whisper traded beside a doorway, in the drumbeat of marching feet somewhere beyond the hill, in the pause before answering a question from someone who believes he owns you. And yet, even in that world you sense something shifting, not kindness, not fairness, not redemption, possibility. It is thin as thread. It is dangerous as ice. It may snap under pressure. It may cut the hand that grips it. Still, it is there, trembling in the charged air of 1776, while liberty is praised in public squares and judged in silence by those who have paid its price without ever receiving its comfort. You listen with them. You breathe the same smoky air. You hear the same bells. And you understand that the revolution does not sound the same to everyone, not even close. You wake into a land that calls itself restless, principled, and brave, yet depends every hour on coerced black labour. By 1776, slavery is not tucked away in one corner of colonial life like a shameful old chair hidden under a sheet. It is in the open. It is in the fields, in the kitchens, in the workshops, at the docks, in the counting houses, in the alleys behind fine homes, and in the muddy yards where laundry snaps in the wind. You feel it in the rhythm of the place, in the way tasks are assigned, in the way bodies are counted, and in the way some people speak as though ownership were as natural as weather. The morning begins with sounds that do not ask your opinion. A rooster tears the dark apart, a cartwheel grinds over ruts. Somewhere nearby, a cow lows impatiently, door hinges complain, a kettle lid rattles, someone coughs in the cold. Smoke from a hearth hangs low and sharp in the nose, mixed with damp straw, old wood, sweat, and the sour smell of yesterday's ashes. Before the sun has fully climbed, work has already begun for thousands of black Americans, enslaved and free, in landscapes that differ widely but share one stubborn truth. The colonies run on labour, and much of that labour is black. In Virginia and Maryland, tobacco country spreads in long, demanding stretches. The soil can look rich and generous, but the crop itself is fussy, greedy, and exhausting. It needs constant attention, and every phase requires hands. Seedbeds must be prepared, tender plants must be transplanted, weeds must be cut back, worms must be picked away, leaves must be harvested, cured, sorted, packed, and moved. Tobacco enters your skin and nose. It leaves a bitter, dusty cling on clothing and fingers. Plantations and smaller farms alike depend on enslaved workers to keep this whole cycle turning. Season after season, while white owners discuss markets, weather, and politics as though toil were an abstract principle rather than a daily ache in human muscles, farther south, rice and indigo shape a different world. In the Carolina Low Country, the air sits heavy over marshes and tidal rivers. Mosquitoes whine at dusk. Mud sucks at your feet. Water glints in channels and ditches that must be managed with skill and back-breaking effort. Rice cultivation is intensely technical. It requires knowledge of flood patterns, embankments, trunks, timing, planting, threshing, pounding, and winnowing. Much of that expertise is carried by enslaved Africans and their descendants, especially people from rice-growing regions of West Africa. White planters profit from this knowledge while pretending mastery belongs to them. History can be rude like that. A man can become wealthy by borrowing another person's expertise at gunpoint, then call himself a genius. In the North, slavery often appears on a smaller household scale. But smaller does not mean kinder. An enslaved woman in Newport, New York, or Philadelphia may cook, scrub floors, wash clothes, mind children, empty chamber pots, spin, sew, and carry water in freezing weather with barely a pause to breathe. An enslaved man might work as a carter, dock labourer, groom, cooper, mason's assistant, chimney sweep, or boatman. Some are hired out, which means their labour earns money for an owner while they themselves may receive only scraps, if that. Urban slavery places black people in constant public view, but visibility is not protection. It can simply mean more eyes judging, ordering, and calculating your value. You start to notice how completely bondage threads through ordinary life. A wealthy household does not function without it. A port city does not move goods without it. A tavern cannot boast of fine supplies if someone has not hauled barrels, chopped wood, scoured pots, brushed coats, and washed linen. Even families who are not among the grandest may rent or purchase enslaved labour when they can. Slavery is not a side note to colonial comfort. It is woven right into the cushion stuffing. That is one of the plain historical facts that matters most. In 1776, every colony has some connection to slavery, whether through direct ownership, shipping, finance, food production, craft labour, or trade networks tied to the Atlantic world, a man in a northern town may congratulate himself for not living on a giant plantation, yet still drink rum linked to Caribbean slave labour, where goods move through slave-built commerce and rely on city systems kept alive by enslaved workers. Moral distance is a favourite luxury of the comfortable, yet life within this system is not uniform. Some enslaved people live in crowded quarters on large plantations, others sleep in lofts, kitchens, attics, passageways, or rough outbuildings behind urban homes. Some work under the gang system, with labour organised collectively under close supervision from dawn to dusk. Others in the Low Country live under the task system, where a defined amount of work is assigned, at least in theory, for the day. Historians still debate how much autonomy the task system genuinely allowed in practice, because what appears flexible on paper could still be shaped by surveillance, punishment, exhaustion, and the owner's whim. Even so, in some places it created narrow pockets of time that people could use for fishing, gardening, trading, visiting kin, or preserving fragments of personal life. Those fragments matter. A patch garden beside a cabin can mean peppers, peas, greens, or sweet potatoes that improve a family's meals. A few chickens can mean barter. A net cast into a creek at the right hour can mean fish frying in a pan at night. The smell of that pan, the hiss of oil, the warmth rising into a cramped room. These are small mercies. They do not erase bondage. They simply show that life keeps pressing upward through the cracks, stubborn as weeds between stones. In some places, enslaved people sell produce, baskets, poultry, or crafted goods in local markets, sometimes with permission, sometimes through arrangements too ordinary to be fully recorded. That creates a curious little wrinkle in the system. An owner may insist a person is property, then trust that same person to handle produce, negotiate prices, or carry out skilled work among strangers. There is a comedy hiding in that contradiction, though it is the sort that makes you exhale through your nose rather than laugh aloud. The whole structure depends on black competence while loudly denying black independence. Free black Americans move within this same economy, though on different and still precarious terms. In coastal towns and cities, some work as sailors, caulkers, rope makers, laundresses, barbers, carters, midwives, cooks, or labourers. A few own property. A few run small businesses. Some belong to churches or mutual networks that offer assistance in hard times. But freedom is hemmed in by laws, prejudice, and the constant threat that a white person may challenge your status. Papers proving freedom can be demanded at inconvenient moments. Kidnapping is a danger. Employment is unstable. White competition and resentment often rise when work grows scarce. Freedom exists, yes, but it is thin ice with boots marching over it. Daily food reveals another layer of this world. Enslaved diets vary by region and season, but many live on cornmeal, salted fish, pork when available, molasses, peas, beans, and whatever can be grown, gathered, hunted, or fished. Meals may be plain, repetitive, and insufficient. In the Chesapeake, cornmeal mush or hoe cakes may fill the stomach without truly satisfying it. In rice regions, rice itself becomes central to survival. In towns, kitchen workers handle rich ingredients they may barely taste. Imagine carrying platters of roasted meat into a candlelit dining room, while your own supper waits cold and sparse by the coals. The smell alone could test a saint. Clothing tells its own story. Plantation owners often issue coarse garments once or twice a year. Rough linen or wool that scratches the skin and wears down quickly under labour. Shoes may be scarce. Children might go half-clothed in warm weather. In towns, some enslaved workers are dressed more neatly because they serve as visible extensions of household prestige. Again, the irony never sleeps. A person can be forced into polished shoes to advertise someone else's gentility while lacking control over the direction of his own feet. Housing is just as uneven. Some cabins are crude and overcrowded, with dirt floors or rough boards, smoke curling badly from poor chimneys, and little protection against winter wind. In city spaces, sleeping arrangements can be even tighter. A corner near the kitchen hearth, a pallet in a hallway, a loft above animals, a cramped room shared by several people. The body never fully relaxes in such places. There is always a draught, a creak, a call from the yard, a child turning in sleep, a reminder that privacy is a luxury owned mostly by others. And still, people make homes where they can. A folded cloth saved carefully, a wooden bowl carved smooth by use, shells arranged on a sill, a song hummed while braiding hair, the scent of herbs hung to dry, the soft rub of worn fabric. These details are easy for grand political history to ignore, but they are where actual living happens. Children enter this world early. Enslaved children may begin with small chores, carrying water, collecting wood, minding younger siblings, chasing birds from crops, turning spits, fetching tools. Their work grows as their bodies do. Play exists because children insist on it whenever possible, but it is braided tightly with responsibility. Free black children face different possibilities, sometimes including apprenticeship, church education, or wage work. Yet their futures remain constrained by race and local law. Childhood is not innocent in 1776. It is observant, practical, and quickly instructed by necessity. One fringe detail from the era catches the eye in a strange way. In some homes, enslaved children were taught to fan flies away from dining tables during meals, standing quietly beside comfort they were never meant to share. It is such a specific, absurd little task. Human beings reduced to moving pieces of summer furniture. The revolution may talk about dignity, but daily life keeps revealing whose dignity counts. Labour also splits by gender, though never neatly. Enslaved women work in fields, kitchens, dairies, laundry spaces, spinning rooms, and nurseries. They plant, weed, carry, milk, cook, mend, and clean. They endure pregnancy without relief from expectation and often return to labour quickly after childbirth. Enslaved men may plough, chop timber, drive carts, tend livestock, build fences, load ships, or practice skilled trades. But necessity overrides tidy categories. Women may perform heavy outdoor labour. Men may serve closely in domestic spaces. Everyone works where profit or survival demands. Disease hangs over all of it. Smallpox, malaria, dysentery, respiratory illness, and fevers move through crowded quarters, marshlands, ports, and army paths. Medical care is uneven, often crude, and sometimes terrifying. Black people may rely on a mix of African knowledge, local herbal practices, community care, and whatever treatment can be accessed or imposed. Scholars continue to explore how African healing traditions shaped colonial medicine, especially in plantation regions where botanical knowledge could mean the difference between life and death. Such knowledge was respected when useful, ignored when convenient, and rarely credited fairly. A familiar pattern. Punishment remains a constant shadow. Surveillance may be close or intermittent, but the possibility of correction, whipping, confinement, sale, or family separation shapes behaviour every day. The fear does not need to be announced each morning. It lives in memory, posture, and tone. A glance can carry it. So can the silence after a command. Yet no system of control is ever perfect. People slow work, hide food, preserve stories, visit loved ones at night, trade information, nurture skill, claim moments of rest beside a doorway in the evening breeze, watch the moon rise over a field, feel warm dirt under bare feet after a long day, listen to frogs in a ditch or waves against pilings in a harbour. Human life keeps slipping past the bars built for it. So when you ask what bondage looked like in a changing land during the Revolution, the answer is not a single image. It is many textures layered together: mud and ash, indigo stain, tobacco dust, rice water, salt fish, coarse cloth, rope fibres, candle smoke, tired shoulders, quick whispers, public ownership and private endurance. The colonies argue about liberty while black Americans carry wood, row boats, harvest crops, mend clothes, and keep whole households functioning. The land is changing, certainly, but it is changing unevenly, nervously, and with a deep dependence on labour extracted from people who are expected to hear the language of freedom and keep working anyway. You rise before the light has properly decided to arrive. The air is cold enough to sting your nose, or thick enough to cling to your skin, depending on the colony, the season, the luck of geography. A rooster calls once, then again, with the confidence of a creature who has never had to negotiate wages. In the dark, you hear the shuffle of feet on packed earth, the creak of boards, the soft clink of iron tools being gathered. Somewhere a baby murmurs, not fully awake. Somewhere a dog barks at nothing visible. The day is beginning, and for black Americans in 1776, especially the enslaved, the day does not ask whether you are ready. Work starts with the body. You feel it before you think it. The stiffness in the shoulders, the ache in the calves, the roughness in your palms, the heaviness in your back from yesterday, and the day before that, and the week before that. Dawn does not bring freshness so much as a new round in an old contest. A woman wraps a cloth over her hair and steps toward the hearth. A man lifts a bucket and feels the handle bite into his fingers. A boy drags kindling through wet grass. A girl rubs sleep from her eyes and begins carrying water before the sky's fully blue. The labour depends on where you are. In a town, the work may begin with ash buckets, stove fires, stable muck, or chamber pots. In the countryside, it may begin with livestock, milking, feeding, harnessing, hoeing, or walking to a field under a sky still brushed with stars. The sounds differ, but the pattern remains. Other people's needs set the pace. Your own body must catch up as best it can. In an urban household, the morning can unfold like a chain of demands, each one small on its own, together exhausting. Light the fire, fetch water, grind grain, cut bread, dress the child, brush the coat, polish the buckle, carry the tray, scour the pan, answer the bell, open the shutter, close the shutter, find the missing glove, reheat the tea, sweep the crumbs. The bell is especially irritating. It rings from another room like a tiny metal declaration that someone else believes urgency lives only on their side of the house. For an enslaved cook, the kitchen is its own weather system. Heat rises off iron pots, smoke gathers under beams, grease pops, dough sticks to the fingers, herbs release scent when crushed, onion, salt pork, boiling grain, yeast, ash, and damp wood blend into a perfume no fashionable bottle would dare attempt. The work is skilled. Timings matter, temperatures matter, storage matters. A mistake can bring anger, a success may bring silence, which is often the closest thing to praise. In the fields, labour has another rhythm, wider and more relentless. Hoes bite soil in repeated strokes. Feet sink in mud or crunch over dry ground. In tobacco country, planting and tending require careful motions, bent backs, and endless attention. In grain regions, harvest brings dust and sharp stalks against the skin. In rice country, the work can be wet, heavy, and dangerous, with mosquitoes whining over standing water and sun pressing down like a hand. You smell earth, rot, green shoots, sweat, and river air. You feel insects on the neck, coarse cloth rubbing at the shoulders, moisture trapped in shoes or under bare feet. The day settles onto you. Some plantation labour is organised through gangs moving together under the eye of an overseer or driver. The pace is public, so is fatigue. Someone falls behind. Someone is noticed. Someone is warned. There is little room for privacy in that arrangement. Every movement becomes visible. In places using the task system, certain workers may be assigned a measured amount to complete. This can sound more flexible, and sometimes it is, but only within hard limits. Historians still disagree about how much breathing room task labour offered across different estates, because records from owners can sound generous, while lived experience may have felt very different. A task large enough to consume the day is not freedom. It is merely bondage with arithmetic. Yet arithmetic matters. People become experts in time. How long to finish a row without inviting attention? How long to let the bread rise while also washing linen? How long to pause near the well and exchange 2 quick sentences? How long a mistress usually naps? How long before the stew catches? How long to stretch the repair of a harness when your hands need 1 extra minute of rest? Resistance does not always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it arrives disguised as timing. In workshops and skilled trades, the labour takes on different textures. Black carpenters plane boards smooth enough to please exacting clients. Black coopers shape staves into barrels that will carry flour, fish, rum, and other goods across great distances. Black blacksmiths coax sparks from iron in hot, punishing bursts. The smell there is unforgettable. Coal smoke, metal scale, sweat, singed leather, hot air filling the nose and throat. Skilled labour can bring a certain grudging regard from white employers, even a kind of narrow dependence, but skill rarely protects a person from ownership. A master can brag about the cleverness of the man he owns without ever noticing the ugliness of that sentence. At the docks, labour has a more restless edge. Crates knock together, rope strains, sailcloth snaps in the wind, water slaps against hulls. Men shout distances, weights, warnings, insults. Fish scales glitter on planks. Tar sticks to the hands. Salt dries on the lips. A free black sailor or dock worker may move through this world with more mobility than many others, hearing news from distant ports and carrying himself with slightly different bearing, but port work is unstable and dangerous. Wages can vanish into a dishonest palm. An employer may delay payment. A press gang may decide your body belongs elsewhere. Mobility has its own hazards. Domestic work can appear softer from a distance, which is one of those lies architecture likes to tell. Floors do not scrub themselves. Laundry does not wash itself. Children do not raise themselves, despite what some parents seem to hope. Washing day alone can devour the strength of several people. Water must be hauled, heated, and carried. Clothing must be soaked, scrubbed, beaten, wrung, and hung. The smell of lye bites sharp and clean. Fingers chap, wrists ache. Steam dampens the face and neck. In winter, wet hands burn in the cold. In summer, the heat wraps around the body until even breathing feels like work. Black women often carry a terrible density of labour, physical and emotional together. They may cook for the household, nurse white children, tend their own children, mend clothes, fetch water, spin thread, milk cows, and still be expected to answer instantly when called. The body becomes a corridor through which everyone else's comfort passes. There is little recognition for this. The day simply expects more, then more again. Men, women, and children all develop tiny methods of endurance. A cloth folded just right can ease pressure on the head while carrying weight. A certain grip can spare the palm. A tune hummed under the breath can keep rhythm steady through repetitive labour. A joke, muttered low enough, can lighten a moment before it disappears. Humour survives in surprising places. You can imagine 2 workers glancing at a white gentleman who has delivered a long speech about liberty, then promptly failed to carry his own boots from one room to another. History contains many serious events. It also contains many helplessly overdramatic men. Children learn fast because they must. Some begin with light chores, but light chores have a habit of growing heavier each year. A child sent to fetch wood also learns who is angry today, who is distracted, which floorboard creaks, which dog bites, Which visitor leaves crumbs worth collecting? A child carrying water learns balance, pace, and silence. A child tending younger children learns patience long before anyone calls it a virtue. There are moments of play, certainly. Sticks become toys, songs become games, pebbles become treasures. But work is always nearby, like weather moving in. Food breaks are rarely generous, though they matter intensely. A pause at midday might mean cornmeal, a bit of pork, rice, beans, fish, bread, or whatever can be spared or supplemented. You taste salt, smoke, grease, and hunger. Hunger has a taste of its own, thin and metallic, especially when the food is not enough. Yet even modest meals can offer a pocket of warmth and company. Someone sits in shade if there is shade. Someone leans against a wall. Someone stretches sore fingers. Someone closes tired eyes for 10 seconds that feel like theft from the universe. There are also the labours that white records often mention only in passing, as if they happened by magic. Nursing the sick, carrying the dead, midwifery, mending nets, plaiting baskets, keeping gardens alive, gathering herbs, repairing shoes, trimming candles, picking lice from a child's hair by firelight. None of this is dramatic enough for proclamations, but it is the substance of daily life. Societies do not continue because speeches are made. They continue because someone washes the pot. One odd detail from the period is the way some enslaved workers in elite homes were expected to move almost noiselessly, especially when serving meals. Imagine training a person into near silence so guests can enjoy the illusion of effortless comfort. Plates arrive, chairs are moved, glasses are filled, the servant seems to float, which is precisely the point. Labour is most admired when the powerful do not have to notice it. A neat trick. That, cruel, but neat. Despite all this, people search for bits of ownership over the day. A worker may tuck away a crust for later. A seamstress may save a scrap of cloth. A field hand may notice blackberries ripening near the edge of a path. A laundress may stand for one extra breath near a doorway where cooler air drifts in. These are small acts. They are not sentimental. They are practical claims to selfhood in a world eager to flatten it. Evening does not always bring rest. Animals still need care. Fires need tending. Supper must be cooked. Children must be settled. Tools must be put away. Clothes must be mended in poor light. Some labour continues by candle or hearth glow. The room dim except for a small orange pulse. You hear spoons against bowls, low voices, the crackle of fat, a cough from the corner, perhaps a murmur of prayer. The body loosens slowly, suspiciously, as if it cannot quite trust the day to be over. Touch becomes important then. The warmth of a bowl between both hands, the softness of a sleeping child's cheek, the relief of unlacing a shoe, the rough comfort of a blanket, thin but welcome, the cool night air passing over the tired skin. These sensations can feel luxurious precisely because the day has claimed so much. For some, night offers a little room for visiting family, sharing news, singing, mending or trading stories. For others, exhaustion wins immediately. Sleep comes hard and heavy. Still, even in that tiredness, the mind may remain active. Who was sold? Who is ill? Who whispered about the British? Who may try to run? Who looked frightened when soldiers passed? Work fills the day, but it does not stop thought. That is perhaps the deepest truth in all of this. Labour was meant to consume the body and discipline the will, yet it never fully succeeded in erasing inward life. Beneath the tasks, under the commands, inside the ache and repetition, Black Americans kept measuring the world. They observed hypocrisy, judged character, cared for one another, and found ways to endure the long haul from dawn to dark. The day was exhausting. The day was controlled. The day was often harsh beyond easy description, but it was still lived by thinking, feeling people who understood exactly how much of the colonies depended on their work. Even when the colonies refused to admit it, love has to become practical in a world like this. It cannot afford to stay dreamy for long. In 1776, for Black Americans, family life is shaped by law, distance, labour, sale, and fear, yet it remains one of the strongest forces in daily existence. You find it in a mother tying a headcloth with one hand while steadying a child with the other. You find it in a father using the last of his evening strength to mend a shoe. You find it in a grandmother telling a story low by the fire while smoke drifts toward the rafters. The room may be cramped, the walls may be thin, the future may be alarmingly uncertain. Still, affection survives there. Stubborn and warm, the first thing you notice is that family does not always fit the tidy shapes legal records prefer. Marriage among enslaved people is often not recognized by colonial law, even when couples make solemn promises to each other and to their communities. A husband and wife may live on different farms or plantations and see each other only on weekends, on certain nights, or whenever an owner's mood allows. Parents and children can be divided by labour assignments, by hiring out, by inheritance, or by sale. Kinship must stretch to survive these pressures. It becomes emotional, social, and moral, not merely legal. A person may be raised by an aunt, a grandmother, an older sister, or a woman who is no blood relation at all but has become family through care. That kind of family takes work. Morning begins with the usual hard facts. Fires must be coaxed alive. Water must be hauled. Infants cry before sunrise. A child needs washing. Another needs to be nudged awake. Someone is coughing in the corner. The smell of smoke mixes with damp wool, old wood, and breakfast beginning in the pot. Yet threaded through these ordinary strains are gestures of tenderness, a hand smoothing a blanket, a spoon tipped toward a child's mouth first, a quick joke to ease a worried face. Family is not always expressed in grand speeches. More often it is built from repeated acts of attention. Enslaved mothers carry an especially heavy burden. They labour for owners while trying to protect children from the world those owners control. That protection can mean teaching obedience in public and dignity in private. It can mean warning a child when to lower the eyes and when to stay alert. It can mean finding extra food, patching clothes by bad light, soothing fever with herbs, and somehow still keeping a little patience and reserve. The touch of a mother's palm on a hot forehead, the rustle of her skirt as she moves between tasks, the soft murmur of reassurance in a crowded room. These are part of the real texture of the era. Fathers, too, struggle to hold authority and tenderness together under conditions designed to undermine both. A man may not control where his children sleep, what labour they are assigned, or whether the family will remain together next season. He may not even live under the same roof, yet he can still teach skills, tell stories, offer warnings, carve a toy, repair a stool, braid a fishing line, or put a child on his shoulders for one brief stretch of evening. Paternal care in bondage often appears in fragments, but fragments can still shape a life. Children grow up inside these fragile arrangements with sharp eyes and early maturity. They learn names, roots, moods, and absences. They know who belongs to whom, and who belongs in the deeper sense that law cannot define. They notice when an adult voice goes quiet after bad news. They sense when a sale is possible before anyone says the word aloud. Childhood still contains play, because children are wonderfully stubborn about joy, but their play often sits very near anxiety. A laugh can stop quickly if hoofbeats enter the yard. For free black families, the legal ground is firmer but not fully secure. A marriage may carry more public recognition. A household may have more control over its own sleeping arrangements, work patterns and movement, yet racism, poverty, and unstable employment remain constant pressures. A free black father may fear kidnapping. A free black mother may worry over rent, food, and the scrutiny of white neighbours. A child may be apprenticed into work early or denied opportunities available to white children. Freedom offers room to build, but not room to relax very much. One mainstream historical fact stands at the centre of all this. Family separation was a constant and defining terror for enslaved people in colonial America. Sale could divide spouses, siblings, parents, and children with brutal efficiency. Even when sale did not occur, inheritance could scatter people after an owner's death. Debts could do the same. So could marriage alliances among white families, who might transfer human beings as property, while speaking of domestic affection with full sincerity. It takes a certain kind of confidence to praise family values while breaking up other people's families over account balances, because separation is such a threat. Moments of togetherness take on unusual weight. A shared meal in the evening matters. A visit between spouses on a Saturday night matters. A child asleep against an elder's shoulder matters. The sound of familiar laughter in the dark matters. Family life becomes precious partly because it is never guaranteed. When something is always under threat, even ordinary peace feels almost ceremonial. Naming children can hold deep meaning here. Names may honour grandparents, living kin, admired figures, or saints from Christian practice. Some reflect African naming traditions in altered form. The records often blur or erase those origins. Names can anchor memory. They can carry hope. They can preserve connection across sail and distance. Scholars still debate how much specific African cultural continuity survived in naming patterns from region to region, because the evidence is uneven and filtered through white record keepers. Even so, the effort to mark belonging through names is unmistakable. A name says, this child is not simply labour waiting to happen. Night gatherings reveal another layer of family life. After work, once food is eaten and the day loosens slightly, people may visit nearby cabins or quarters, sharing talk, songs, remedies, and news. Firelight glows on faces. Pine smoke hangs sweet and resinous. A baby dozes through adult conversation. Someone braids hair with patient fingers. Someone laughs so suddenly the whole room lifts for a moment. These visits strengthen bonds that law tries to weaken. Family in this world is often collective. It includes cousins, in-laws, godparents, elders, foster ties, and companions in hardship. An especially interesting detail from the era is that some enslaved parents made dolls, rattles, or tiny carved toys for children out of scraps of cloth, corn husks, wood, or bone. The materials were humble, but the intention was rich. Imagine the gentleness required to shape a toy after a full day of labour. Imagine those tired hands still deciding that a child deserved delight. That small object says more about human resilience than many polished political speeches ever could. Religious practice also supports family bonds. In some households, Bible stories are shared when possible, especially narratives about deliverance, suffering, and justice. In other places, African spiritual memories, Christian teachings, and local customs blend in ways that formal records rarely capture well. A grandmother may pray over a child. A mother may sing a lullaby with layered meanings. An elder may use herbs while speaking words of comfort learned long before. Home, even a very unstable one, becomes a place where knowledge passes quietly from one generation to the next. That passing down of knowledge is essential. Children must learn not just chores, but judgment. They are taught which paths are safe after dark, which white people are less dangerous than others, how to carry themselves in tense moments, how to store food, mend cloth, or recognize weather. Girls may learn spinning, cooking, childcare, and medicinal knowledge. Boys may learn fishing, woodcraft, animal care, or tool repair. But these divisions are never perfect. Necessity teaches flexibility. In a precarious world, survival skills are everyone's business. There is also grief, and it lives close by. Some families have already lost members to sale, disease, punishment, or overwork. Others live under the possibility daily. Grief is not always loud. Sometimes it appears as silence at supper, or a pause when a name is mentioned, or the way a mother keeps a small piece of cloth that belonged to a child no longer there. The senses hold memory powerfully. The smell of a certain herb can recall an elder. The creak of a floorboard can summon someone who used to enter at that hour. A tune can reopen a whole vanished room. Historians continue to argue over the degree to which colonial slaveholders deliberately encouraged stable family formation versus merely tolerating it when convenient. Some owners understood that family ties might make a labour force more settled. Others showed little hesitation in disrupting those same ties for profit. The truth seems to vary widely, often according to local economy, estate size, and personality. But from the perspective of the enslaved, the motive hardly softens the reality. A bond permitted at another person's convenience is not security, and yet people marry, they court, they flirt, they make promises. You can picture two people stealing a few words near a fence line, their voices low, the evening air cooling around them. One smooths a sleeve, one laughs softly, somewhere nearby. Insects begin their night music. Such moments are vulnerable and ordinary at once. Courtship survives because the desire for companionship survives. So does the wish to build something larger than oneself. Even inside a system built to deny lasting ownership of almost anything, elders are especially important within these family worlds. A grandmother or grandfather may carry memory beyond what younger people know, linking children to places, names, and histories that written documents ignore. Elders teach manners, proverbs, songs, warnings, and endurance. Their voices may be softer, but their authority can be immense. The smell of medicinal leaves drying near their sleeping place, the careful rhythm of their speech, the way children lean in when they begin a story, all of this forms part of the household atmosphere. In societies that strip property and legal standing, memory itself becomes a kind of inheritance. Sometimes family stretches even farther, across roads, counties, or colonies. News travels through visitors, sailors, hired workers, market days, and rumour. A woman may hear that a brother has been seen in another town. A man may learn that his daughter was sold south. These fragments can sustain hope or deepen sorrow. They can also inspire extraordinary effort. People walk long distances for a brief visit. They trade favours to carry messages. They remember names with fierce precision. Connection becomes labour too. Even the smallest domestic rituals take on meaning. Hair is combed and braided. A shirt is mended carefully, because appearance still matters to dignity. A blessing is spoken over food. A child is reminded to greet an elder properly. Someone saves the better portion for a sick relative. Such customs create moral order where legal order offers little justice. They say, we are still people with obligations, affections, and standards of our own. So when you look closely at black family life in 1776, you do not find a simple picture of either destruction or triumph. You find constant making and remaking. Families are assembled, stretched, wounded, defended, improvised, and cherished. They exist in cabins, alleys, attics, rented rooms, plantation quarters, and city edges. They are carried in memory when distance intervenes. They are whispered into being through vows no court records. They are strengthened by care, endangered by commerce, and kept alive by people who refuse to let love become abstract. In a world prepared to price everything, family remains one of the clearest declarations that human value cannot be measured so neatly. Night changes the emotional temperature of the colonies. Day belongs to commands, to counting, to visible labour, to the endless business of making wealth for other people. But when darkness settles over fields, lanes, kitchens, docks, and quarters, another kind of life begins to breathe more fully. In 1776, black Americans carry spiritual worlds that are intimate, adaptive, and deeply sustaining. Faith is not a decorative extra added after labour is done. It is shelter, language, memory, strategy, and a way of holding the self together when the surrounding world works steadily to pull it apart. You notice it first in sound, a low voice praying beside a bed of straw, a half-sung line rising from someone washing a pot by firelight, a murmur of agreement from the corner of a room, hands clapping softly to keep time, feet shifting against dirt floors, the wind moving through cracks in the boards. Somewhere farther off, a white church bell marks the hour as if time itself were properly arranged and accounted for. But inside black homes, cabins, yards, and hidden gatherings, spiritual life follows a deeper clock. Christianity is already widespread in the colonies by the Revolution. Yet black religious life does not simply mirror white religious practice. It absorbs, reshapes, and revoices it. Biblical stories about captivity, deliverance, exile, judgment, and promised freedom hold obvious power. Moses, Pharaoh, Jordan, Zion, bondage, rescue. These themes do not arrive as pleasant abstractions. They touch lived reality, a person who has been bought, sold, watched, and ordered understands captivity in a way that requires no commentary. A promise of deliverance can sink into the body like warmth after a cold day. At the same time, African spiritual traditions remain present in many communities, especially through rhythm, healing practices, funeral customs, oral memory, cosmology, and ideas about protection, presence, and the relation between the living and the dead. Historians still argue over how directly particular African traditions can be traced in different regions by 1776, because the records are thin, distorted, and filtered through white observers who often misunderstood what they saw. But the persistence of African influence is clear in the texture of practice, in forms of collective worship, in music, in gesture, and in ways of seeing the sacred in everyday life. In some places, enslaved people attend white churches, sitting in galleries, back rows, or segregated spaces, expected to absorb approved lessons about obedience and humility. Ministers may preach that servants should submit, that order is God's will, that suffering on earth will be rewarded later. It is a convenient theology if you happen to own the pew cushions. Yet even within such spaces, black listeners are not blank paper. They hear selectively, they weigh tone, they listen for what slips past control. A sermon about Israel delivered by a man who owns human beings may still ignite thoughts he never intended. You can imagine the sensory contrast. The white meeting house smells of wet wool, old wood, candle wax, and winter breath. Benches are hard, children fidget, a minister drones through long theology while boots scrape the floor. But the same text, repeated later in a black cabin by the hearth, can become alive in a different way. There, voices soften and strengthen. A verse is not recited for discipline but turned over for comfort. Someone explains a line through lived pain. Someone else answers with a song. Scripture moves from formal instruction into shared possession. This private or semi-private devotional life matters enormously. Prayer may happen at the bedside, over food, over a sick child, before a journey, or in moments of fear. Songs may serve as consolation, memory, or warning. Spiritual gatherings can be quiet and domestic, or more collective when circumstances allow. In plantation regions and in some rural communities, people may gather after work in cabins, yards, or tucked away corners of woods. The darkness helps. So does distance from the main house. The smell of pine, damp earth, and night air mixes with smoke from nearby fires. Crickets pulse in the grass. Breath turns visible in cold weather. A ring of listeners forms. Someone begins. The form of worship can be highly participatory. Call and response, improvised prayer, rhythmic movement, and repeated lines create a sense of shared strength. The body joins the voice. feeling is not something to hide politely behind a handkerchief. It moves through the room, even when outward expression must stay subdued because of surveillance. Inward intensity can be profound. Faith becomes a communal force, not a private ornament. One mainstream historical fact is especially important here. During the 18th century, the Great Awakening and related evangelical currents encouraged some white preachers to bring Christianity more actively to enslaved people. This did not end slavery or eliminate racist theology, but it did widen access to Christian teaching and create spaces where some black converts, exhorters, and later preachers emerged. The consequences were complicated. Religion could be used to reinforce submission, yet it also offered language, community, and moral authority that black Americans turned toward their own purposes. Those purposes included endurance, dignity, and sometimes subtle resistance. A prayer meeting could also be a meeting where news travelled. A hymn could carry layered meaning. A sermon retold in black company could emphasize justice rather than obedience. A gathering to comfort the grieving could also strengthen the bonds needed for mutual aid, planning, or simple emotional survival. Resistance does not always look like open rebellion. Sometimes it looks like refusing to let the master's version of God be the final one. That refusal can be quiet. A woman might whisper a prayer over her child that asks not just for safety but for freedom. A man might sing a line about crossing over and mean more than one kind of crossing. An elder might remind the young that earthly power is not ultimate, which sounds theological and also rather usefully political. Spiritual life offers a vocabulary broad enough to conceal and reveal at the same time. There is also a physical dimension to this faith that sleepy summaries often miss. Worship is felt in the chest, in the hands, in the breathing. Clapping warms cold palms. Kneeling presses the knees into rough boards or packed earth. Tears sting. A voice grows hoarse from singing. A body sways. Exhaustion and relief can mingle strangely. After a day of imposed labour, choosing to lift your own voice has a force all its own. Healing practices sit near the edge of this spiritual world too. Herbs, roots, poultices, teas, spoken blessings, and inherited remedies often overlap with prayer. A feverish child may be treated with plant knowledge alongside whispered petitions. A mother may tie an amulet, keep a protective object, or follow customs that blend Christian language with older traditions. White observers sometimes dismiss these practices as superstition, which is a classic strategy for benefiting from other people's knowledge while insulting it at the same time. Yet for black communities, such practices could be part of an integrated view of care, body, spirit, memory, and protection. A particularly striking tidbit appears in scattered accounts of nighttime gatherings, where enslaved worshippers placed an iron pot or kettle upside down outside the meeting place, so that the sound of prayer and song would be muffled and less likely to carry to white ears. Historians debate how widespread this exact custom was in the 18th century, but the image remains powerful, faith literally sheltering itself beneath metal and darkness. A hidden acoustics of hope. It is almost too perfect, and yet history is sometimes poetic when nobody asked it to be. Funerals and mourning practices reveal another side of spiritual life. Death is frequent in the colonial world, from disease, childbirth, overwork, exposure, and accident. Black communities meet death with grief, memory, prayer, and ritual. Though the exact forms vary by region and heritage, the dead are not always allowed elaborate ceremony, especially under slavery. Yet people still mark loss through song, gathering, washing the body when possible, speaking names and caring for the bereaved. The smell of candles, the quiet scrape of shovels, the cool night air, the low murmur of voices, these things stay in the memory. Mourning itself becomes a testimony that a life mattered. Children are brought into this spiritual atmosphere early. They hear prayers before they understand every word. They memorize hymns by repetition. They learn which stories matter most. Noah, Moses, Daniel, deliverance from lions, fire, flood, and empire. They watch adults bow heads, raise hands, and comfort each other with scriptural language. In that sense, faith is an education long before it is formal doctrine. It teaches moral order, collective memory, and the idea that injustice is not the whole shape of the universe, however dominant it may seem at noon. Some Black Americans become known for religious leadership even in these restricted conditions. A man who can pray with force, interpret scripture vividly, or comfort the sick may earn trust and status within the community. A woman known for healing, counsel, song, or deep spiritual steadiness can hold equal authority, though white records often fail to acknowledge it properly. Community leadership does not always wear official titles. Often it wears an apron, carries herbs, or speaks in a voice everyone listens to when trouble comes. The emotional register of this faith deserves attention too. It is not only solemn, it can be joyful, ironic, fierce, playful, and tender. Relief and laughter often sit close together. Someone may tease a pompous white minister after the service is over, gently but with excellent aim. Someone may sing with such force that tired faces brighten around the room. Someone may give thanks for a loaf of bread as if it were a feast, not because they are naive, but because gratitude itself is one of the few riches nobody can seize cleanly. There are limits, of course. White authorities can be suspicious of large black gatherings, especially in regions where fears of uprising run high. Meetings may be watched, regulated, or dispersed. Some owners prefer Christian instruction because they think it will encourage obedience. Others fear that too much literacy, too much assembly, or too much spiritual independence will undermine control. The line between tolerated worship and threatening congregation can shift quickly. Black spiritual life develops under that pressure, learning caution without surrendering meaning. What emerges is not a single uniform religion, but a living field of practice, biblical memory, African inheritance, evangelical influence, domestic ritual, healing knowledge, music, whispered prayer, and collective emotion all move through it. You can smell cedar smoke and damp wool. You can hear insects outside and clapping inside. You can feel the smoothness of worn wood beneath your hand, the ache of kneeling, the warmth of bodies gathered near in winter. All of it forms a sheltering atmosphere, not against physical danger alone, but against the constant erosion of the spirit. So when you step quietly into the spiritual lives of Black Americans in 1776, you do not find passive consolation. You find active meaning-making. You find communities interpreting suffering without surrendering to it. You find songs that carry memory, prayers that steady frightened hearts, and beliefs that refuse to let earthly masters define the full measure of reality. In a world loud with commands, faith offers another voice. In a world obsessed with ownership, it insists that the soul remains beyond account books. And in a year when liberty is being praised in public, Black Americans are already shaping a deeper freedom in private. One whispered prayer, one shared song, one guarded gathering at a time. War does not arrive politely. It comes as rumour first, then movement, then absence, then hunger, then marching feet where yesterday there were only cart tracks. In 1776, the American Revolution is no longer just a quarrel in pamphlets or a speech over ale. It has become a living disruption that reaches into kitchens, fields, docks, ferries, market lanes, churchyards, and slave quarters. For Black Americans, this upheaval changes daily life in immediate, practical, and often dangerous ways. It does not suddenly make the world fair. It simply loosens old arrangements and makes room for new risks. You feel that change in the air before you fully understand it. White men speak more urgently. Horses are saddled at odd hours. Wagons carry flour, powder, blankets, and tools instead of ordinary goods. Militia drills begin in open spaces. Drums beat, bells ring, doors close quickly after certain conversations. Maps appear on tables, letters are hidden, prices rise, Strangers pass through. The smell of anxiety is not poetic. It is sweat inside wool coats, damp leather, cold iron, stale bread carried on the road, and smoke from fires burned longer than usual because no one is sleeping well. For enslaved people, war can scramble the routines that usually govern labour and surveillance. Owners leave for military duty, political meetings, or sudden journeys. Overseers become distracted. Young white men eager for glory abandon farms and shops they once supervised. Homes become crowded with soldiers, refugees, kin, or supplies. Livestock disappears. Food stores shrink. Tasks change overnight. A woman who spent months in kitchen labour may be sent to carry water for troops or nurse the sick. A man used in field work may suddenly be ordered to drive a wagon, dig earthworks, move barrels, or ferry messages. The old pattern does not vanish, but it shudders. That shudder matters. War creates confusion, and confusion can open space. Not safe space, not generous space, but openings. A gate left unwatched for one night. A road less monitored because patrols have gone elsewhere. A master too distracted to notice who lingers by the river. A tavern crowded with military talk where valuable information can be overheard. A town suddenly full of uniforms from different sides, each side needing labour and each side claiming principles. Upheaval rearranges power just enough to make decisions possible that might have been impossible in calmer times. Black Americans respond to this instability with intense attention. They listen. They compare reports. They watch troop movements. They measure which army is near, which roads remain open, which ports are blockaded, which officials are nervous, which promises might actually be acted upon. A free black sailor in a harbour city hears one sort of intelligence. An enslaved groom near a county courthouse hears another. A woman serving meals in a patriot household may learn more from careless table talk than the men at the table would ever imagine. Powerful people often become even more talkative when frightened. It is one of their less useful habits. There is a major historical fact at the centre of this moment. The Revolutionary War created opportunities for tens of thousands of enslaved people to seek freedom by escaping to British lines, by moving through wartime confusion, or by exploiting the breakdown of local control. This did not happen evenly across all regions, and it did not guarantee safety. But the war unquestionably opened possibilities that peacetime slavery had kept more tightly shut. The possibilities are never simple. Every choice carries danger. Staying put may mean continued bondage, sale, forced relocation, or harsher oversight from anxious owners. Leaving may mean starvation, capture, disease, violence, or betrayal. Roads are long. Rivers are cold. Armies consume supplies. Strangers may help or deceive. A rumour of freedom can lure a person into disaster as easily as into deliverance. No wonder people weigh their options carefully, sometimes for weeks, before making a move that must happen in minutes. You can imagine the sensations of such a decision. Night air cold in the lungs, mud pulling at the shoes, a child's hand gripped too tightly, the distant bark of dogs, the smell of marsh water or horse sweat, the creak of a fence rail as you slip over it. The body feels every sound more sharply when fear is involved. Twigs snap too loudly. Fabric catches on brush. Breathing seems impossible to quiet. Yet the same body can also feel a startling lightness in motion, as if the act of choosing risk over certainty has changed the weight of the air. War also changes how white Americans talk about black people. Patriots who insist they fight for liberty suddenly worry that enslaved labourers will flee, spy, or assist the enemy. Loyalists and British officers view black labour through their own mix of strategy, prejudice, and necessity. Planters demand protection for their property while speaking the language of rights. Revolutionary committees discuss political principles and slave patrols in the same season, sometimes nearly in the same breath. The contradiction is not hidden. It simply stops embarrassing the people who benefit from it. In some regions, especially the South, fear of insurrection intensifies. White authorities know perfectly well that war weakens control. That knowledge makes them more vigilant, more suspicious, and often more severe. Patrols increase. Movement is restricted. Gatherings are watched. Punishments may be sharpened to frighten others into stillness. But fear can cut both ways. A terrified ruling class is less stable than it appears. It sees danger everywhere, which means it cannot focus everywhere at once. Free black people face their own wartime calculations. A free man in Philadelphia or Boston may see military service, transport work, or maritime labour as an opportunity for wages, mobility, or public standing. He may also fear impressment, racial violence, or being pushed into service without fair compensation. A free black family in a contested area may need to decide whether to flee, stay, hide valuables, or navigate between competing authorities. Freedom on paper becomes harder to defend when governments themselves are in motion. Women carry a great part of the wartime burden, though military history often wanders off after the drums and forgets to look back. Enslaved and free, black women cook for soldiers, wash clothes, tend wounds, carry water, protect children, preserve food, and manage emotional survival inside unstable households. They hear news while serving meals. They interpret changes in tone. They calculate whether this officer, that committee, or those passing troops make a household more dangerous than usual. Practical intelligence lives heavily in women's work during war. Disease follows armies with miserable loyalty. Smallpox, dysentery, fevers, and respiratory illness spread through camps, ships, towns, and crowded homes. The smell of sickness becomes familiar. Sour linens, vinegar washes, sweat trapped in blankets. The stale breath of shut rooms. War means more bodies moving, more filth, more interrupted care, and more fear of contamination. For black Americans, who already live with constrained access to medical help, this adds another layer of hazard. Freedom sought through wartime movement may run directly into pestilence. A curious tidbit from the period shows just how blended war and labour became. In some places, enslaved men were compelled to build fortifications for the very white revolutionaries who spoke most grandly about resisting tyranny. Imagine digging trenches, hauling timber, or raising defences for men who are loudly offended by distant political control while quietly depending on forced labour at arm's length. The irony does not even bother to dress itself anymore. It walks about in daylight. Armies also generate demand for practical skills. Teamsters, boatmen, carpenters, blacksmiths, cooks, pilots, sailors, nurses, and labourers all become more valuable in wartime. Black Americans possess many of these skills already. That can create openings for pay, bargaining, or movement, but also for coercion. A man known to be a skilled pilot may be pressured to guide troops through local waters. A carpenter may be ordered to work on barracks or wagons. A laundress may find military camps generating endless bundles of filth and too little soap. War values labour intensely without becoming morally improved by that realisation. There is also the question of loyalty, though that word can be misleading here. Loyalty assumes a person has been treated as a member of the political community in the first place. Many black Americans are not choosing between beloved national ideals. They are judging which side, if any, offers a better chance of survival, mobility, wages, protection, or eventual freedom. That is not faithlessness. It is realism. Historians continue to debate how far ideology shaped black decisions compared with immediate circumstance. But the distinction can be overstated. In a world where freedom is concrete, practical calculations are themselves political. Wartime mobility increases contact among black people from different regions. Soldiers, refugees, sailors, labourers, camp followers, and runaways exchange news across boundaries that peacetime life often kept tighter. A man from Virginia may hear reports from New York. A woman in South Carolina may learn what British officers are promising elsewhere. Camps, ports, and occupied towns become accidental crossroads of information. Ideas travel with astonishing speed when enough frightened and hopeful people carry them. Children absorb war differently, but not less deeply. They hear muskets in the distance. They notice adults whispering at night. They learn that uniforms mean uncertainty. Some are moved suddenly with households. Some are separated in flight. Some watch roads constantly, trying to judge from hoofbeats whether arrival means danger or relief. Childhood during war is full of interrupted naps, hurried meals, and eyes made older too soon. The landscape itself begins to feel unstable. Roads that once led to market now lead to armies. Rivers become escape routes or barriers. Woods become hiding places. Churches become storehouses or hospitals. Fine houses fill with officers. Barns become barracks. Harbours smell of tar, salt, and tension. Every familiar place acquires a second meaning. The world becomes tactical and still. Daily life continues in stubborn fragments. Bread must be baked, fires must be lit, babies must be soothed, clothes must be mended. Chickens wander where history is trying to happen, unbothered as ever. That ordinary persistence is part of what makes wartime choices so hard. People do not choose in a dramatic empty space. They choose while stirring a pot, holding a child, watching weather, fearing illness, and listening for the next set of boots on the road. So when war opens dangerous doors for black Americans in 1776, it does not swing them wide with a heroic flourish. It cracks them unevenly in wind and darkness, with armed men nearby and no guarantee on the other side. Yet even that is enough to change everything. The revolution ceases to be just something discussed by white colonists and becomes a field of perilous opportunity in which black Americans act, observe, calculate, and move. Some will escape. Some will enlist. Some will hide. Some will be trapped. All must reckon with a world suddenly made more fluid and more deadly at once, where old controls weaken just enough for possibility to appear. By late 1775 and into 1776, the most startling rumour in black America is not a philosophical argument from a pamphlet. It is a promise. Not a pure promise, not a generous one, and certainly not a universally honoured one, but a real offer made in the midst of war. If you are enslaved and owned by a rebel master, the British may grant you freedom if you escape and join their side. The news moves quickly, first by whispers, then by talk at wells, docks, kitchens, ferries, back lanes, and quarters. It travels through black sailors, through servants who overhear officers, through labourers in towns, through terrified planters, through newspapers read aloud, and through the simple fact that white people become visibly alarmed. That alarm tells its own story. The offer most closely associated with this moment comes from Lord Dunmore, the Royal Governor of Virginia, who in November 1775 issues a proclamation promising freedom to certain enslaved people belonging to patriot masters if they flee and bear arms for the British cause. The wording is limited. It does not abolish slavery. It does not apply to everyone. It serves military strategy as much as moral principle, perhaps far more. Yet its impact is electric. For enslaved people, the proclamation does not need to be perfect to be revolutionary. It only needs to be believable enough to risk everything for. You can almost feel how such news lands in the body. A pause in the middle of work, a raised head, a hand still resting on a hoe handle, a washboard, a rope coil, a bucket. The sentence repeats in the mind. Freedom. British lines. Run. The heart moves first, then caution catches up. Is it true? Who qualifies? How far? What happens if you are caught? Can children come? Can a husband leave if his wife is on another farm? Can an older mother make the journey? Does the road cross water? Is the promise meant for people like you, or only for the lucky, the strong, the nearest. This is where history stops being abstract and becomes painfully practical. Dunmore's Ethiopian regiment soon forms from men who escaped to the British. Its very existence sends shockwaves through white Virginia. Imagine the sight from a patriot perspective. Men once counted as property now wearing uniforms, carrying weapons, and moving under royal authority. The visual insult alone is enough to unhinge a planter breakfast. One can hardly butter toast in peace while the old hierarchy appears to be marching away down the road. The British promise is powerful not because it is universally sincere, but because it introduces a new political fact. Black freedom can now be used as a weapon in the war. That changes calculations everywhere. Enslaved people begin asking not only whether the British can win, but whether they can reach them. White slaveholders begin fearing not only military defeat, but labour flight and social collapse. Patriot talk of liberty becomes even more strained when measured against this reality. Many white colonists who roar against British tyranny suddenly become fierce defenders of slave property the moment the Crown offers liberty to the enslaved. Principles, it turns out, can become wonderfully flexible when tobacco profits are involved. The numbers matter here. Thousands of enslaved people across the war, especially in the South, seek freedom by fleeing to British forces in Virginia alone. Dunmore's move inspires substantial flight. This includes not only men willing to bear arms, but also women, children, and older people seeking refuge as war expands. The offer evolves beyond the narrow text of the original proclamation through the behaviour of British commanders, naval officers, and occupations in different places. Freedom under the British becomes a lived possibility, though one full of inconsistency and danger. Danger arrives immediately. The journey itself can kill. Runaways cross swamps, rivers, forests, and enemy territory. They travel by night, they hide by day. Dogs may track them, patrols may search roads, neighbours may betray them. Children may cry at the worst possible moment, hunger bites hard, wet shoes rub feet raw, winter wind cuts through thin clothing, summer insects swarm. A person escaping does not step into a clean corridor marked liberty this way. They step into uncertainty, mud, and fear, trusting rumour more than law. And even when the British are reached, freedom is not always what the word suggests at first hearing. Some fugitives are welcomed, enlisted, assigned work, or protected. Others are used hard, crowded into unhealthy camps, placed aboard ships, or left vulnerable to disease and shortage. Smallpox is especially devastating. British camps and vessels become sites of refuge and death at once. The smell of sickness settles over hope. Sour sweat, infected bedding, smoke, brine, unwashed bodies, and fear. Many who flee bondage only to reach British lines face illness so severe that the promise of liberation becomes tangled with suffering almost immediately. Historians still debate how far British policy on black freedom was driven by principle, military expediency, or local improvisation. The answer appears to be all three in shifting proportions. Some British officers saw strategic value above all. Others expressed genuine anti-rebel sentiment without broader abolitionist commitment. A few grasped the moral contradiction more deeply, but the institution of slavery remained embedded within the wider British Empire, especially in the Caribbean. So the promise offered to black Americans during the Revolution was always selective, contingent, and shaped by war rather than pure justice. Still, from the perspective of someone in bondage, selective hope may be enough. Perfect motives are less important than real openings. Women face especially painful calculations in this moment. A proclamation aimed at men who can bear arms does not erase the needs of wives, daughters, mothers, or children. Yet women flee too, often in large numbers, seeking the protection of British camps, ships, or occupied towns. They may work as cooks, laundresses, nurses, labourers, or servants. Some travel with husbands, some travel alone. Some drag children through marsh and darkness because remaining in place seems worse. The image of wartime escape often centres on armed men, but black women carry a tremendous part of this movement on their backs, in their arms, and in decisions made under extraordinary pressure. There is a peculiar and revealing detail in all this. British officers and patriot slaveholders alike often describe black fugitives in terms of labour value, even while discussing military and political strategy. A strong man means transport work, digging, soldiering, piloting, or loading. A woman means washing, cooking, nursing, carrying. A child means future labour or logistical burden. Human beings are assessed through use before sympathy ever gets its boots on. Even in the moment of escape, the world insists on measuring black bodies by what they can do for somebody else. History can be unbearably consistent, yet fugitives are not simply reacting. They are reading the landscape with skill. They track troop movements. They learn which British ships take runaways. They identify weak spots in local control. They exchange names of officers rumoured to honour promises. Sometime their escape to military raids or confusion after skirmishes. Others leave when owners evacuate and order collapses. A remarkable amount of intelligence flows through ordinary conversation, market chatter, and domestic service. The British promise spreads because black Americans become expert carriers of wartime information. The emotional force of that promise should not be underestimated. Imagine living under a regime where your movement is owned, your kin vulnerable, and your future priced in currency. Then hearing that somewhere beyond the next county or the next river, another authority is willing to call you free, perhaps not from love, perhaps not forever, but free. The word must have felt almost dangerous to hold too long in the mouth, too bright, too sharp. A person might whisper it only once, then look around quickly, as though someone could punish even the sound. For patriot leaders, the whole affair is deeply embarrassing. They cannot easily denounce British cruelty while explaining why British military policy now appears more favourable to enslaved people than American liberty does. Their responses reveal the priorities beneath the rhetoric. Many condemn Dunmore less for stirring violence than for threatening slave property. The fear is not only that Britain may win support, but that enslaved people may conclude, quite reasonably, that the side offering actual freedom deserves practical consideration. There are cruel reversals too. Some runaways are captured by patriots and punished harshly. Some are returned. Some British officers fail to protect those who trusted them. Some people who reach British lines are later displaced again by military retreat. Freedom acquired in wartime can remain painfully unstable. A person may escape one owner only to be pushed into years of service, migration, or uncertainty under another authority. The road out of slavery is not straight simply because the British made it visible. A mainstream fact of the period often overlooked in sleepy retellings is that white patriot fear of slave flight helped shape military decisions, local security measures, and political rhetoric in places like Virginia. The War for Independence was not merely a contest between colonists and Crown. It was also a struggle over control of enslaved labour, and over what would happen if that labouring population seized the moment to move. Black Americans were not bystanders to the revolution. Their possible actions altered strategy itself. Children feel this British promise differently, yet very keenly. They hear adults whispering faster than usual. They notice bundles being prepared or hidden. They sense when hope and fear mingle in the same room. A child may not understand proclamations, but a child understands urgency. The smell of packed food, the touch of a mother's hand gripping tighter than normal, the silence when hoofbeats pass, the difference between an ordinary night and a night chosen for escape. There is also bitter uncertainty in the phrase freedom itself. What does it mean under British protection? Does it mean land, wages, legal recognition, and safety? Or does it mean only no longer being returned to a rebel master? scholars continue to examine how black fugitives themselves understood the term, and the evidence suggests a wide range. For some, immediate release from personal bondage may have been enough to justify the risk. For others, family security mattered most. For others still, military service, travel, or removal from a violent locality might have counted as freedom's first step, not its full arrival. That ambiguity sits at the centre of the story. The British promise is real enough to inspire flight, yet unstable enough to disappoint. It is both liberation and wartime instrument. It creates hope while exposing fugitives to fresh forms of suffering. It reveals imperial hypocrisy and colonial hypocrisy at the same time. Though only one side is currently offering the enslaved a door, however narrow, so you stand in 1776 and watch that door appear in the distance. Not golden, not safe, not guaranteed, but open enough for people to run toward it through swamp water, darkness, smoke, and rumour. Black Americans hear the British promise with clear eyes. They know white powers rarely give without taking. They know armies are hungry masters too. But they also know a practical truth that grand political philosophers sometimes miss entirely. An imperfect chance at freedom can outweigh a perfect speech about it. And in a world already structured by risk, the chance is sometimes enough to move a person into history with astonishing speed. Not every black American looks toward the British when war reshapes the colonies. Some turn, cautiously or decisively, toward the patriot cause. This choice is not simple. It is not a tidy vote of confidence in men who speak of liberty while holding others in bondage. More often, it is a practical, local, and carefully judged decision shaped by region, legal status, military need, family pressure, and the narrow opportunities that wartime can create. In 1776, black Americans served the revolutionary side in many roles as soldiers, sailors, wagoners, labourers, servants, craftsmen, pilots, and substitutes. Their presence is real, useful, and often inconvenient to the clean heroic picture later generations prefer. You begin with the sound of recruitment. Drums tap in town squares. Officers call for enlistments. Men gather in knots near courthouses, taverns, wharves, and meeting houses. Boots scrape on packed dirt. Muskets knock lightly against each other. Horses stamp. Papers rustle. Voices rise with patriotic fervour, then drop when the practical matters appear. Who will serve? For how long? Who will be paid? Who will replace the labour left behind? And quietly but importantly, will black men be accepted, refused, tolerated, or used? At the beginning of the war, some black men do join patriot forces, especially in New England. They fight in militia units, in the Continental Army, and in local defence. Crispus Attucks, killed in 1770 at the Boston Massacre, is already remembered by some as an early martyr to the colonial cause, though memory can be a selective little creature that likes symbolism more than justice. His death does not suddenly make the patriot world equal. But it does show that black presence in the revolutionary struggle is not an afterthought invented later. It is there from the start, visible if anyone cares to look properly. A major fact of the period is that George Washington and other patriot leaders initially showed reluctance about black enlistment, especially for enslaved men, but military necessity pushed policy in more flexible directions. The Continental Army badly needed manpower. In some areas, especially in the north, free black men and some enslaved men served in integrated units. Rhode Island would later become especially notable for recruiting black soldiers, including enslaved men promised freedom in exchange for service, though that fuller development belongs slightly beyond the first heat of 1776. Even now, the pattern is forming. Need is bending principle, which is one of war's least surprising habits. For free black men, patriot service can offer wages, rations, clothing, mobility, and a claim, however precarious, to public belonging. A uniform does not erase racism. It does not guarantee fair treatment, steady pay, or future equality. But it can place a man in a different relation to the state than peacetime life usually allows. To stand in line with a musket, to drill, march, and receive orders as part of an army, this carries symbolic weight. It says you are necessary, even if only under pressure. Necessity is not justice, but it can create room where none existed before. The sensory world of military service is harsh and immediate. Wool itches, leather stiffens in the rain, powder smoke bites the throat, salted meat grows tiresome beyond words. Campfires leave clothes smelling of ash and grease, blankets itch, mud creeps into everything. Drums pulse at dawn, teeth chatter in cold tents, flies settle on the sick in warm weather. A soldier lives by the stomach, the feet, and the weather almost as much as by political ideals. For black soldiers in patriot service, these ordinary military discomforts exist alongside the strain of racial suspicion and the constant question of whether service will be honoured when the danger passes. Sailors live by a different rhythm. Black men serve aboard privateers, merchant vessels supporting the war effort, and naval craft. Ship life offers both possibility and misery. Ropes burn the hands, decks pitch underfoot, salt dries on the face, tar clings stubbornly to skin and clothes, wind cuts through every layer in bad weather. The smell aboard is unforgettable. Bilgewater, brine, canvas, smoke, fish, wet wood, sweat. Yet ships also carry news, wages, and movement. A black sailor may hear political arguments from several colonies in 1 month, and learn quickly which officers are fair, which are cruel, and which ports are changing fastest. Enslaved men enter the patriot war effort under especially tangled conditions. Some are permitted or compelled by owners to serve in their place. A master who does not wish to risk himself may send an enslaved substitute while continuing to speak grandly about civic virtue, which is a wonderfully efficient arrangement if your conscience has gone out for a walk. In certain cases, military service may lead to a promise of manumission. In others, it may simply mean danger in another man's uniform. The line between opportunity and exploitation is painfully thin. Substitution exposes the contradictions of the patriot cause with remarkable clarity. A white man can remain home, preserve his comfort, and still claim the honour of contribution, while a black man risks battle, disease, and hardship in his stead. Historians still debate how often manumission promises attached to such arrangements were fulfilled cleanly, and how often they were delayed, disputed, or denied. The evidence suggests a mixed and troubling record. Wartime promises have a way of growing vague once peace returns and the paperwork begins. Black labour for the Patriot side goes far beyond formal enlistment. Armies need roads, trenches, wagons, boats, shoes, food, barrels, tents, tools, and transport. Black teamsters drive supply wagons over miserable roads. Black carpenters repair wheels, build huts, and shape timber. Black blacksmiths shoe horses, mend ironwork, and keep equipment useful. Black pilots guide vessels through dangerous waters. Black labourers load flour, haul cannon, bury refuse, dig fortifications, and do the endless, unglamorous work without which military glory would collapse into hungry confusion by Tuesday afternoon. Women's work is equally essential, though military memory often pretends wars are won by men posing near maps. Black women cook, wash, nurse, mend, carry, and improvise. Free, black women may find paid labour around camps, hospitals, or military households. Enslaved women may be assigned or forced into support roles that keep troops fed and clothed. Laundry alone is relentless. Buckets slosh, steam rises, lye stings cracked fingers. Wet wool weighs like sorrow. In military spaces, dirty linen multiplies like a biblical curse. Without laundresses and cooks, armies quickly become dangerous to themselves. There is a revealing little tidbit in the world of patriot service. Some officers praised black soldiers and sailors as brave, disciplined, or dependable when military need was acute, then later spoke against broad black equality once the immediate danger eased. Praise, in other words, could be as temporary as camp rations, useful on the day, missing by the next week. It is one thing to admire a man under fire. It is another to treat him as a fellow citizen when taxes, land, and voting are being discussed. Many white Americans found the first easier than the second. For some black men, patriot service is tied to local identity. A free man from Massachusetts may feel attachment to his town, his church, his dockside companions, or the place where his family lives. Fighting for the revolutionary side can mean defending home more than defending abstract ideology. The same may be true for sailors protecting trade or labourers assisting local militias. Political choices are often rooted in place, not just principle. A man may serve because the British threaten his neighbourhood, because his employer presses him, because the pay is needed, because his friends enlist, or because he believes service might strengthen a future claim to rights. Motives can overlap without cancelling each other. The emotional tension remains sharp. Imagine marching beside white soldiers who may joke with you one day, share a crust the next, and still refuse to dine with you as an equal once camp settles for the night. Imagine hearing officers speak of liberty while knowing some of them would never accept your testimony in court or your full place in civil life. Such contradictions do not disappear because a uniform is issued. They march along with you, one boot step at a time. Yet camaraderie can develop in war's practical spaces. Shared hardship has its own rough intimacy. Men shiver under the same rain. They curse the same spoiled meat. They carry the same heavy loads. They fear the same cannon. In those moments, rank and race do not vanish. But daily dependence can alter behaviour. A white soldier who trusts a black comrade in battle may still carry prejudice. But battle has forced a fact into his hands that rhetoric alone could not. This man stood. This man carried. This man did not run. That kind of evidence is difficult to ignore, even if many try later. Children and families watch patriot service with mixed hopes. A wife may see wages or freedom in the distance, but also widowhood. A mother may feel pride and dread together. The smell of packed food, the brush of a sleeve before departure, the sight of a man walking off with cartridge box and blanket roll. These details become loaded with possibility. Service can bring money, status, or release from bondage. It can also bring fever, amputation, unpaid wages, or disappearance. War does not offer clean bargains. A scholarly uncertainty lingers over how much patriot military service directly shaped black political consciousness during the revolution itself, as opposed to how later memory framed that experience. Some historians emphasize the immediate significance of bearing arms and claiming public service. Others caution that the benefits were uneven and often limited to specific individuals and regions. Both views carry weight. Service clearly mattered. So did disappointment. The revolution opened claims to citizenship that black veterans would press more forcefully in later years, but in 1776 those claims remained unstable, contested, and often painfully local. There are also differences between North and South. In the North, where slavery is less central to the entire plantation economy, black enlistment for the Patriot side becomes somewhat more thinkable, though still contested. In the South, white fear of arming enslaved men remains stronger, shaped by demographic realities and terror of revolt. That fear constrains policy sharply. A white Virginian may praise military courage in theory, and go pale at the thought of handing a musket to a man he claims as property. The contradiction is almost elegant in its panic. Black Americans serving the Patriot cause are therefore not simply welcomed into a growing democracy. They are negotiating their usefulness inside a revolution that has not decided what to do with them. Some receive pay, some receive freedom, some receive nothing but hardship and a story nobody wants to hear clearly afterward. Yet their labour and service are real, not decorative. They help move guns, man boats, cook meals, bury waste, march roads, load ships, stitch clothes, and fill ranks. The revolutionary machine depends on them more than its public mythology is comfortable admitting. So when you step into the patriot side of Black wartime experience, you do not find a simple tale of loyalty rewarded. You find service under pressure, courage mixed with calculation, hope shadowed by mistrust. You smell powder, tar, wet wool, and camp smoke. You hear drums, shouted orders, coughing in tents, and low voices discussing pay that may never arrive. You feel the rub of coarse cloth, the weight of tools, the soreness of marching feet, and inside all of that, you sense a clear truth. Black Americans are not merely watching the revolution happen from the margins. They are helping carry it, even while many of its loudest champions hesitate to admit what that should mean. When the war begins to settle into longer patterns, you notice something unsettling about the map. It is not moving in one direction. It is splitting. In some northern places, the language of liberty starts to press against slavery with real legal force. In much of the South, slavery digs in deeper, harder, more defensively, as if frightened people have decided the best answer to contradiction is to build it into stone. For Black Americans, this creates a landscape of uneven change. Freedom begins to appear in certain courtrooms, legislatures, churches, and private agreements, while chains remain firm elsewhere, tightened by fear, profit, and habit. The revolution does not produce one future, it produces several, and they do not treat black lives equally. You feel this division first in talk. In northern towns, conversations shift. Lawyers argue, ministers preach with slightly altered emphasis. Newspapers discuss natural rights in ways that can no longer avoid the question of slavery entirely. White people who once treated bondage as ordinary household furniture begin, at least in some circles, to call it embarrassing, inconsistent, or difficult to defend. Not everyone becomes generous overnight. Let us not get carried away. Many would still prefer freedom to arrive quietly, cheaply, and without disturbing dinner. But the discussion itself changes. Something has been set in motion that is difficult to stop. In places like Massachusetts, court cases and constitutional language begin to undermine slavery directly. In Pennsylvania, gradual emancipation laws start to reshape legal expectations. In other northern states, similar moves will follow in uneven ways. The key word here is gradual. Freedom in the North rarely arrives as a grand trumpet blast with everyone smiling nobly in the background. More often it appears through legal categories, birth dates, age thresholds, apprenticeship terms, registration requirements, and long delays. A child born after a certain date may be legally destined for freedom, but only after years of service. An adult may remain enslaved while public opinion shifts around him like weather changing too slowly to warm the room. That gradualism matters enormously. It means northern change is real, but limited. It opens doors while leaving many people standing in hallways for a very long time. A black woman in Pennsylvania may hear that slavery is being restricted, yet still rise the next morning to the same labour, in the same kitchen, under the same authority, knowing that the law has begun to move but her own body has not yet been released. Hope under those conditions is strangely administrative. It lives in dates, papers, witnesses, and the hope that someone in office can count correctly for once. Still, even such partial change is historically significant. The revolution helped stimulate anti-slavery thought and legal action in the North, not because white society suddenly becomes enlightened, but because its own rhetoric about liberty, citizenship, and natural rights becomes hard to contain. Black petitions, military service, church activism, and public argument all contribute to this pressure. White conscience does not awaken by magic. It is pushed, challenged, embarrassed, and cornered into motion. In northern cities, this produces a subtle shift in atmosphere. Free black communities grow more visible, mutual support networks strengthen, churches and benevolent efforts begin to take more organised shape. Black sailors, labourers, domestic workers, craftsmen, and veterans navigate a world that still discriminates harshly, yet now includes slightly broader legal cracks through which self-determination can grow. The streets still smell of dung, smoke, salt, and slops thrown carelessly from windows. Work is still hard, prejudice is still constant, but the horizon changes. A person may now speak of freedom not only as escape, but as a claim recognised in some courts and laws. That legal recognition remains fragile. Kidnapping still threatens. Employers still exploit. White mobs and white resentment do not evaporate because a legislature has found its conscience in a powdered wig. Historians continue to debate how transformative northern emancipation was in everyday life during and immediately after the Revolution. Because racial inequality remained severe, and many people labelled free still lived under intense dependency. Yet the distinction between slavery and freedom matters even when both are burdened. One is ownership in law, the other, however constrained, allows room for family stability, wages, religious institution building, property holding, and political petitioning in ways slavery does not. In the South, the atmosphere moves in another direction. Here the war often deepens white fear and hardens white resolve. British offers of freedom, runaway activity, military invasions, and the general instability of wartime persuade many slaveholders that slavery must be guarded more fiercely, not questioned more honestly. Patrols remain crucial. Discipline is emphasized. The language of property grows sharper in plantation zones. The economy still depends heavily on enslaved labour, and white elites have no intention of loosening their grip simply because northern idealists have discovered moral discomfort. You can feel the difference in the texture of daily life. In the South, the road between field and quarters still carries the same exhausting footsteps. The smell of rice water, tobacco leaf, indigo vats, sweat, pine smoke, and damp earth remains. Overseers still watch. Drivers still press the pace. Sale remains an ever-present threat. The war may have shaken the system, but in many areas it emerges more defensive than before. White Southerners have looked into the possibility of mass black flight and decided the answer is tighter control. There is a mainstream fact here that cannot be missed. The post-revolutionary North begins a process of gradual emancipation, while the South, especially with the coming expansion of plantation agriculture, preserves and later intensifies slavery as the foundation of its social and economic order. The revolution exposes the contradiction everywhere, but the responses diverge sharply. One region starts edging away from slavery, cautiously and incompletely. The other prepares to protect it with renewed determination. This divergence also affects the emotional geography of black life. In northern places, stories circulate about legal victories, manumissions, schools, churches, and possibilities for children born under new laws. In southern places, stories often centre on escape, sale, surveillance, and the dangers of being too hopeful in the wrong hearing. Black Americans pay close attention to these regional differences. Information about where freedom can be claimed, where relatives might settle, where courts might listen, and where danger remains absolute becomes intensely valuable. A curious detail from the era catches this split in a surprisingly domestic way. In some northern households, enslaved people nearing legal freedom were still expected to serve tea, clean silver, and maintain the rituals of gentility for owners who now prefer to think of themselves as humane reformers. Imagine polishing the spoon for someone congratulating himself on gradual emancipation while postponing your liberty one more season. Moral progress can be astonishingly pleased with its own reflection. Religious life reflects the divide as well. In the North, anti-slavery arguments begin to gain strength in some Quaker and evangelical circles, and black Christians increasingly build institutions of their own where possible. In the South, white religious instruction often continues to stress obedience, hierarchy, and social order, even as black spiritual life develops in resilient, inwardly powerful ways beyond white control. Faith remains vital everywhere, but the public possibilities around it widen more in the North. Family strategy changes depending on region too. A free black family in a northern city may invest in apprenticeship, church membership, or mutual aid, hoping to create a stable foothold across generations. An enslaved family in the South may focus more urgently on preserving kin ties under threat, identifying safe travel routes, cultivating extra food, and gathering information about owners, patrols, and markets. Both are planning for survival, but the available tools differ. Children experience the divide in especially revealing ways. In parts of the North, a child born after an Emancipation Act may carry a future shaped by timed service rather than lifelong bondage. That is not full childhood freedom, but it changes the family's imagination. A parent can count years differently. In the South, a child is still often counted first as labour in waiting. You feel the cruelty of that contrast immediately. One child's life is being translated into delayed possibility. Another's remains entered in the ledger as property from the start. Women also navigate these changes with sharp intelligence. In northern settings, a free black or gradually emancipated woman may push for wage work, household independence, religious participation, or control over children's futures. In southern settings, an enslaved woman may focus on preserving family, resisting exploitation where possible, and interpreting every local shift in law or military condition for signs of danger. Women often become the managers of regional reality, absorbing legal change and daily necessity into one continuous practice of judgment. Scholars still argue over whether the revolution should be seen as the beginning of slavery's end in America, or as the moment when sectional contradiction became more entrenched and dangerous. The honest answer is that it is both, depending on where you stand. From Boston or Philadelphia, change can seem imaginable, if maddeningly slow. From Charleston or the Virginia Tidewater, the institution remains brutally alive, defended by wealth and fear. One revolution, two trajectories. The smell of paper matters in this world more than you might expect. Legal documents, registrations, manumission papers, petitions, baptismal certificates, apprenticeship terms, military discharge records. Ink and folded sheets become part of the material texture of freedom in the North. A person's future may hinge on a clerk's handwriting or a witness's memory. In the South, paper matters too, but often in darker ways. Bills of sale, estate inventories, patrol passes, advertisements for runaways. The same civilization that drafts lofty declarations also drafts receipts for human beings with practiced ease. Even movement itself becomes regional. Northern roads may carry free black labourers, veterans, and families seeking work or community in growing towns. Southern roads carry enslaved workers between fields, markets, and plantations, watched carefully. Their movement still subject to permission and punishment. Harbours in the north can suggest wages and departure. Harbours in the south can suggest export, military threat, or the possibility of flight. Geography never means just one thing, and yet black Americans in both regions continue to act. They petition, they sue, they enlist, they worship, they marry, they run, they bargain. They build institutions, they remember kin across distances, they judge which white promises have substance, and which are only air dressed up for public display. Regional difference does not erase shared struggle, but it changes the form that struggle takes. So as the revolutionary era unfolds, you see a nation beginning to split morally even before it fully admits it. In the North, change comes with paperwork, hesitation, and self-congratulation. But it comes in the South. Slavery survives the revolutionary challenge and braces itself for expansion, becoming more guarded, more defended, more central to elite power. Black Americans live inside that uneven map with extraordinary awareness. They know freedom is becoming imaginable in one place and more fiercely denied in another. They know a line is forming, not just on paper, but in law, labour, family life, and the future's parents can picture for their children. The new nation is not resolving its contradiction. It is distributing it by region and asking Black Americans to bear the consequences. When the fighting begins to ease, a strange quiet settles over the land. It is not true peace, not the deep kind that lets a body unclench all at once, but a thinner quiet made of exhaustion, damaged roads, unpaid debts, missing people, and fields that still need tending no matter what flags have changed. The new United States celebrates independence with speeches, print, parades, and public memory. Liberty has won, so the story goes. Yet, for Black Americans, the end of war does not close the question of freedom. It sharpens it. The nation has spoken boldly about human rights, and now those words hang in the air like smoke that refuses to clear. You feel the tension in ordinary scenes. A white veteran returns home to applause, embraces, and praise for sacrifice. A black veteran returns with the same sore feet, the same memories of camp smoke and hunger, perhaps the same discharge papers folded carefully in his pocket, and discovers that admiration has very strict boundaries. A free black sailor hears celebratory talk in a tavern and wonders whether the Republic includes him in any practical sense. An enslaved woman in Virginia watches the war end while her daily labour remains exactly where it was, as if the entire revolution passed overhead like weather and never touched the ground beneath her shoes. That is one of the central facts of the post-war moment. Independence does not bring general emancipation. Slavery remains legal and deeply entrenched in much of the new nation. In the North, gradual emancipation continues to take shape in some states. But in the South, bondage remains woven tightly into the economy and social order. Thousands of black Americans who pursued freedom through war now face uncertain futures shaped by law, geography, paperwork, and the willingness of white authorities to honour anything at all. For those who escaped to the British and remained under British protection, the end of war brings another set of life-changing decisions. Some black loyalists are evacuated from American soil, especially from places like New York, and resettled in Nova Scotia, London, the Caribbean, or later Sierra Leone. Their names are sometimes recorded in remarkable documents such as the Book of Negroes, a ledger of black evacuees leaving New York in 1783. That record is one of the clearest reminders that black Americans were not background figures in the Revolution. They moved through it, forced decisions within it, and left traces that still speak. But evacuation is not easy deliverance. The ships are crowded. The air below deck is stale and sour. Salt clings to clothing. Children cry. Adults worry over provisions, weather, disease, and what awaits at journey's end. Freedom may now be recognized in one sense, yet poverty, cold climates, racism, and broken promises remain close companions. In Nova Scotia, many black loyalists receive poor land, inadequate supplies, and harsh treatment. A person can escape slavery and still find the empire rather unimpressive when it comes time to hand out tools, shelter, or respect. Those who fought or laboured for the Patriots' side face a different kind of disappointment. Some black veterans receive pay, manumission, or formal recognition. Others spend years trying to secure what was promised. Some owners refuse to free men who served in their place. Some officials delay or dispute compensation. Some veterans find that military courage does not translate into civil equality once the drums stop. Historians still argue over how widely wartime service changed white attitudes toward black citizenship in the immediate post-war years. The evidence suggests a mixture of grudging respect, selective amnesia, and persistent racism. Heroism is easier for a republic to borrow than equality is for it to grant. You can picture the texture of these post-war frustrations. Papers unfolded and refolded until the edges soften, ink fading slightly in the damp, boots worn thin from walking to offices, courts, or former masters. Voices kept careful and polite before clerks who have the power to delay a life with one lazy motion of the hand. The smell of candle wax in public rooms, the scrape of quills, the cough of someone waiting in line. Freedom in the new republic is often bureaucratic long before it becomes secure. For free black communities in northern cities, the post-war era brings both possibility and pressure. Churches become more organised. Mutual aid networks strengthened. Black institutions begin to form with clearer purpose. Families pursue schooling where they can, apprenticeships when available, and independent households when wages allow. At the same time, white prejudice remains thick in the streets. Work is often precarious. Housing can be poor. Violence and exclusion continue. Freedom expands the horizon, but it does not remove the obstacles standing all across it. In the South, the mood hardens. Planters and legislators study the wartime years and draw defensive lessons. They have seen enslaved people flee to British lines, gather information, and use military confusion to seek freedom. The response is not shame. It is control. Surveillance remains intense. Legal restrictions persist. Economic dependence on slave labour deepens, especially as southern agriculture looks toward future expansion. The revolution has frightened slaveholders, but it has not converted them. If anything, many come out of the war more determined to guard the institution that made them rich. There is a revealing post-war detail in the language of the time. White Americans increasingly celebrate the revolution as a triumph against slavery to Britain, while continuing to hold actual enslaved people in households, fields, and workshops. The metaphor survives in public speech even when the reality continues in private life. It is almost impressive, in a dreadful way, how comfortably political language can sit beside moral blindness. The Republic congratulates itself for throwing off chains while listening to chains clink in its own yard. Black petitioners do not let that contradiction rest quietly. In northern states especially, free and enslaved black Americans continue to petition legislatures, courts, and religious authorities for liberty and equal treatment. Their arguments are often direct, disciplined, and morally devastating. If liberty is a natural right, why is it withheld? If service in war proves loyalty, why does freedom not follow? If the nation is founded on principle, why is race used to cancel principle the moment it becomes inconvenient? These are not exotic philosophical puzzles. They are questions put to a government by people who understand its language perfectly well. Family life in the post-war years remains uncertain, but it also becomes a site of determined building. Free black parents seek legal marriages, stable work, and recognized homes. Enslaved families continue to protect kin ties under threat. Veterans try to reunite with wives and children after service. Women who carried households through wartime now try to transform survival into stability. The smells and textures of domestic life return with stubborn force. Bread baking, soap boiling, rain on roofs, a cradle creaking at night, a pair of shoes drying by the hearth. Politics may occupy newspapers, but life is rebuilt in these smaller acts. For many black loyalists who leave with the British, departure carries a deep emotional complexity. The land they leave may contain parents, siblings, graves, familiar creeks, remembered roads, and the very language of childhood. Freedom can require exile. The touch of a ship's railing under the hand, the sight of shoreline receding, the smell of tar and seawater, all of it can mean escape and loss at the same time. To leave slavery behind is not to leave history behind. Memory boards the vessel too. A quirky but striking detail from the aftermath is that some black veterans and freed people in the North used titles, clothing, military bearing, or formal manners to claim public dignity in ways that unsettled white observers. A well-dressed black man with confidence, papers, and a veteran's posture could provoke admiration in one passerby and irritation in another. Respectability was not a cure for racism, but it could function as a visible demand for recognition. The young republic liked symbols. Black Americans understood that and sometimes used the republic's own taste for display against it. Religious institutions continue to matter deeply in this period. Black Christians, whether Methodist, Baptist, Anglican, or part of other traditions, build fellowship and leadership that support education, mutual aid, and moral community. In some places, discrimination within white churches helps push black worshippers towards separate congregations and independent leadership. The process is uneven, but important. Spiritual life becomes one of the key foundations for black public life in the new nation. A church is not only a place of prayer, it is also a place of strategy, relief, learning, reputation, and collective memory. Scholars continue to debate how revolutionary the revolution truly was for black Americans. Some stress the extraordinary openings it created, the rise of anti-slavery sentiment in the North, the large-scale flight to British lines, the growth of black petitioning, and the formation of early free communities. Others emphasize the brutal continuity of Southern slavery, the narrowness of legal change, and the persistence of racial exclusion even where freedom expanded. Both readings are necessary. The era is not a neat victory or a total defeat. It is a hinge. It opens, but unevenly. It promises, then delays. It wounds, then creates space for new claims. Perhaps that is the deepest truth of liberty's long aftertaste. The revolution leaves black Americans with more than one inheritance. It leaves disappointment. Certainly, it leaves broken promises, legal evasions, and the spectacle of white men praising freedom with extraordinary volume while practicing inequality with extraordinary calm. But it also leaves language that cannot easily be taken back. It leaves precedents of service, flight, petition, faith, institution building, and self-assertion. It leaves black families and communities with sharper tools for arguing, organizing, and imagining. The new nation would prefer a cleaner story. It would prefer liberty to mean what it says only when convenient. It would prefer the war to settle everything important. But history is rarely so cooperative. Black Americans continue to test the Republic against its own words, and in doing so they expose the unfinished business embedded in the founding itself. Independence has been won. Equality has not. The flag rises, the contradiction remains, and millions of quiet acts, from courtroom petitions to church gatherings to parents teaching children their worth, begin the longer struggle that the revolution only partly revealed. Now the hour grows softer. The noise of public triumph fades a little, and the smaller sounds return. A fire settling into embers, night wind slipping along the boards, water moving somewhere beyond the dark, a child breathing in sleep, a kettle cooling by the hearth. You let the sharp edges of the day begin to loosen, the speeches drift farther away, the marching feet grow faint. What remains are human lives, steady and fragile, carried through uncertainty by memory, labour, love, and hope. You can rest with that quieter truth, a mother smoothing a blanket in low light, a father folding worn papers with careful hands, a sailor listening to harbour water in the dark, a veteran watching smoke rise into a cold sky, a family sharing bread in a room that finally feels, for a moment, their own. The new republic is still restless outside, still arguing, still inventing itself with more confidence than wisdom. But here, the air is calmer, the candle burns lower. The room holds the scent of ash, wool, and sleep. Whatever the nation promised or withheld, black Americans carried forward their own knowledge of endurance. They built life in narrow spaces. They guarded kin. They prayed, worked, moved, and remembered. They kept hold of dignity where they could, and when they could not hold it openly, they kept it inwardly alive. So let the larger story grow dim now. Let the flags lower into shadow. Let the courtrooms empty. Let the ships settle at anchor. Let the roads go still beneath the moon. You're left with the quiet persistence of people who knew that freedom was not a single event announced once in bright ink, but a long, uneven journey felt in the body, defended in the heart, and passed gently from one generation to the next. And as the night deepens, that truth becomes softer, steadier, almost like a lullaby carried on cool air, reminding you that even in a harsh age, human beings kept making warmth, meaning, and tomorrow.